Paul Bunyan, the giant lumberjack and the blue ox. In the far reaches of the American wilderness, where the echoes of jade echo through the old forests, where footprints are bigger than hills, there is a story that has lived forever in the hearts of the people of this land. It is not the story of a king, a sage, or a warrior, but of an old woodcutter who liberated the pioneer of the Wild West, the man who held the wild forest, the man who carried on his shoulders the desire to expand America. Paul Bunyan and his legendary companion, Babe the Blue Ox, are symbols of strength, of the pioneering spirit, and of a time when people did things no one had ever thought of. I invite you to join me on that journey through each chapter, each land, to discover a legend not only of America, but also of the courage of people in the face of the wild nature. The child born in a snowstorm. The strange blizzard. That night, the wind began to howl long before sunset. The elders of the village looked to the sky and whispered, "Something's coming." Snow began to fall, but it wasn't the usual white snow. No, this was thick, heavy, bone-chilling snow, shimmering with a faint blue glow, like the northern lights had fallen to earth. And in a tiny cabin deep in the woods of Maine, a giant baby was born that night. They say his first cry shattered 3 church windows nearby. His mother could only gasp, "This is no ordinary child." The early years. The boy was named Paul Bunyan, born into a long line of loggers and woodsmen. But no one in the family could teach Paul much. At 3 months old, Paul was taller than his father. By 6 months, he was learning to walk, but each step shook the ground, sending chickens flying and barns creaking. They say the village had to dig a small pond just to bathe him. And when he ate, forget spoons. They used a coal shovel to feed him oatmeal. The bigger Paul grew, the stronger he became. People adored him, but they feared him too. And so they made a difficult decision. They sent Paul into the wilderness, to grow up in the mountains, far from towns and roads, where only nature could raise him. And so, the giant child grew up with the forest as his teacher. The beginning of a legend. Paul learned how to chop trees from the whispering wind. He learned to cross mountains by following bear tracks. He didn't study books. He studied the rivers, the rocks, the snow. By the time he turned 12, Paul Bunyan had already become a living legend. He could snap tree trunks with his bare hands. He wandered through frozen peaks like other kids wandered their backyards. And each morning, long before dawn, folks claimed they heard his voice, singing through the forest. A giant boy with a mighty body and a gentle heart. That was only the beginning of Paul Bunyan's legend. But the real adventure hasn't even started yet. What will happen when Paul meets a creature even more mysterious than himself? A beast born of snow, with fur as blue as the winter sky. Chapter 2. The Meeting with Babe, the legendary blue ox, is where the true journey begins. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow the rest of this legendary tale. Because the myth is just beginning. The meeting with Babe, the legendary blue ox. The strange winter. That year, winter lingered longer than ever before. The snow piled so high that towering pine trees stood buried, their tops barely poking through. The wind howled like an ancient voice echoing through the forest, whispering tales of something coming. Paul Bunyan was 13 then, twice the height of a pine tree, swinging an axe the size of a canoe. He lived alone in the woods, joyful in his solitude, never knowing the feeling of loneliness. Until that strange winter came. One morning, before the sun had even kissed the sky, Paul heard something different. It wasn't the cry of wolves or the crash of falling trees. It was breathing, heavy, labored, tired. He followed the sound, and with every step, he saw prints in the snow, prints unlike anything he'd ever seen. Larger than an elephant's, sunk deep like frozen ponds, and strangest of all, the snow around them had turned a glowing shade of blue. The first encounter. Beyond a frozen ridge, Paul found it. A giant ox, blue as the northern sky. Its fur shimmered like silk beneath the pale morning moonlight. The great beast lay in the snow, shivering, lost, cold, and alone. Its breath rose in swirls of icy blue mist, and its eyes, huge, round, and strangely gentle, looked at Paul as if they had known him forever. Paul knelt beside it and laid a hand on its back. "Who are you, big fella?" he whispered. The ox gave a soft, rumbling bellow, more like a sigh than a cry. And in that moment, a bond was born. A name and a journey begins. Paul named the ox Babe, a simple name for a magnificent friend. He carried Babe back to his log cabin, lit fires of red pine wood, and blanketed the creature in the warmest bearskins he could find. For weeks, Paul cooked oatmeal in buckets, feeding Babe spoonfuls with a steel shovel. Babe healed fast. Within a month, he was running through the snow like nothing had ever happened. And from then on, Paul and Babe became inseparable. Babe could pull dozens of full-grown trees with ease. Some days, the two of them could clear an entire forest by sundown. Folks claimed that when Paul laughed, the sun would shine. When Babe bellowed, the snow would stop. And when the two ran together across the frozen rivers, the earth would tremble. Paul Bunyan was no longer alone. Now he had Babe, the strong, loyal, sky-blue companion who bellowed every time Paul sang off-key. But their journey was only just beginning, because soon Paul and Babe would lead a team of legendary lumberjacks across America, clearing forests, blazing trails, and carving their names into the land itself. Chapter 3: The logging years, a journey through the wild frontier, is where the legend truly ignites. If you enjoyed Paul and Babe's journey so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow the next epic chapter. The most incredible parts of the legend are still ahead. The logging years, a journey through the wild frontier. The giants gather. Paul Bunyan and Babe had become legends of the forest. But even legends knew, no one clears an entire country alone. So Paul blew his horn, a mighty horn carved from the tusk of a frozen mammoth. The sound echoed across valleys and glaciers, through mountains and rivers, summoning the strongest souls of the land. And they came, Big Joe, who could throw a full-grown tree like a javelin. Whistlin' Jack, whose whistle could shake apples from trees 3 miles away. Iron Annie, the blacksmith girl with arms of steel who crushed stone like peppercorns. They gathered around a massive bonfire. Paul stood tall, holding his giant axe in the firelight, and declared, "We'll blaze a trail where no man's dared. We'll build a new America." Clearing the wild, building the camps. They began in the deepest woods, the parts of the map marked only with one word, beware. Each morning, Babe pulled wagons loaded with axes, saws, and timber rigs. Paul led the way, felling trees with swings that echoed like thunder. The giant crew followed, chopping, hauling, digging, building. Legend says Paul could drop 10 trees in one swing. And Babe? He stomped down swamps into solid roads with a single stride. By sundown, they'd cleared miles of forest. At night, they slept beneath the stars, on bear pelts, by the warmth of pine fires. No complaints, no hesitation, because every mile blazed was a promise of freedom and future. Nature fights back, but the wild did not yield easily. They faced rivers that ran backward, glaciers that moved like sleeping beasts, snowstorms so fierce the sky turned white and vanished. Once, the crew was trapped in a canyon so deep even sunlight couldn't find it. They wandered for hours until Babe stopped, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Paul placed a hand on Babe's horn. "What do you see, old friend?" Then, by a sliver of moonlight, they realized. It wasn't a canyon. It was a mouth, a stone creature as big as a mountain, sleeping in silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Paul slowly lowered his axe, then turned, quietly, and led them away. Because sometimes, blazing a trail isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when to walk another path. And so, they moved on, blazing roads, crossing rivers, leaving footprints not just in the soil, but in the hearts of every dreamer who dared believe. Paul Bunyan and Babe were no longer just men and beast. They were movement. They were hope. But the journey wasn't over. Because soon, Paul would face an enemy no axe could chop down. An enemy no strength could stop. Time itself. Chapter 4. When legends battle oblivion, the war against time will reveal the hardest truth any hero must face. If this tale stirred something in you, if the thunder of Paul's axe echoed in your heart, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this legend is just getting started. When legends battle oblivion, the war against time. A strange stillness. One morning, deep within the endless pine forest, Paul stopped swinging his axe. Not from exhaustion, not because of rain, but because everything was too quiet. No birdsong, no echoing crash of falling timber. Even Babe stood motionless, his giant blue eyes staring toward the far-off horizon. The crew kept working, building camps, chopping trees, hauling logs. Paul felt something different in the wind. The world was changing. The wilderness was shrinking. Railroads replaced rivers. Cities bloomed where snow and silence once ruled. A giant in the age of machines. Paul Bunyan did not grow old, but he began to feel like he no longer belonged. People no longer looked to the skies hoping to see Babe's massive silhouette. Children no longer played giant lumberjack in the fields. Now they spoke of machines, factories, and locomotives faster than any storm. Someone asked him, "Paul, why don't you build railroads instead of clearing trees?" Another chimed in, "We've got tractors now, don't need Babe anymore." Paul smiled, but behind that smile, there was something quiet. He wasn't angry. He understood. Every legend must one day step off the stage. The final battle. That night, Paul gazed up at the star-strewn sky. The same sky he once dreamed of carving his name into. And he asked himself, do legends die? Babe came close, pressing his massive head gently against Paul's shoulder. Still loyal, still strong. But even Babe knew tomorrow would no longer be theirs. So Paul did the only thing a true giant could do. He didn't fight time with brute force. He chose to preserve the story. He told their tale of storms and mountains, of rivers crossed and forests conquered. He carved the names of every crew member into the last untouched tree. And then, with Babe by his side, they walked away, quietly just as they had come. No one knows where Paul Bunyan and Babe went. Some say they became a constellation in the northern sky. Others believe they sleep beneath the mountains, waiting to rise again when America needs them most. But one thing is certain, Paul Bunyan never lost to time. Because when someone lives in the hearts of millions, they never truly fade. Chapter 5. The Giant's Legacy, When Stories Become Belief, will reveal what came next, how the tale was passed on, and why it still burns bright today. If you believe legends never die, if Paul and Babe stirred something deep inside, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue the journey into the final chapter, where myth becomes legacy. The giant's legacy, when stories become belief, when silence becomes a story. After Paul and Babe disappeared, the forest grew quiet again. But it wasn't the silence of forgetting. It was the stillness of a story waiting to be told. In the old logging camps, weathered lumberjacks whispered tales of Paul, the man who could fell 10 trees with a single swing, and Babe, the blue ox who could stride across rivers in a single step. Children listened wide-eyed, picturing the blizzards where Paul once battled nature itself. Grown men sat by the fire, nodding slowly. Whether it's true or not, the spirit is real. From legend to symbol, bit by bit, the story became more than just words. It turned into murals on small town walls, into statues in public parks, into the names of schools, diners, and city streets. Paul Bunyan was no longer just a giant. He became a symbol of the values America holds dear. Strength, the spirit of exploration. The belief that no challenge is too great when we face it together. And the strangest thing was, the more people shared the story, the stronger Paul became. A belief that never fades. Today, the world has changed. Forests have thinned. Technology reigns. Kids don't play with wooden axes. They scroll screens. But sometimes a child still asks, "Dad, was Paul Bunyan really real?" And the father just smiles and says, "If you believe in him, then he's still alive." Because a legend doesn't need to be proven. It only needs to be believed. Paul Bunyan may be gone. Babe may no longer stomp across soft earth. But every time someone refuses to give up, every time we face a mountain bigger than ourselves, every time a child looks up to the sky and dreams beyond fear, Paul Bunyan lives again. Not through muscle, but through faith. If you've journeyed this far, if your heart stirred at the swing of Paul's axe, if Babe once wandered through your imagination, then please, like, share, and subscribe. Because there are still many more legends waiting to be told. And who knows, the next story might be your own.